welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. I am Tyler Donahue. They are Daniel Gallant and Mark Brennan, my colleagues at Lions 24/7. And last episode, I gave you a heads up. We were getting an opportunity to go back to Beaver Stadium to speak with several members of this Penn State coaching staff, many of whom we have never been face-to-face with. They hear from Matt Campbell again for the first time since December 8th introductory press conference. And that all happened on Wednesday. Hopefully you caught our coverage over at lions247.com. We spent a couple of hours in the Beaver Stadium media room, then relocated up to the recruiting lounge. And again, face-to-face with so many of these names that we've mentioned here on the podcast in recent months, but had really yet to speak with directly. So not only did we learn more about the new coaches that are on campus, but we learned a ton about the players who fill up their respective position rooms. Matt Campbell, I thought, was fantastic in this press conference setting, a little bit different than his initial go-round when he was introduced. It was emotional. His whole family was there. This was a lot more centered on getting to work, building this Penn State football team and what they've accomplished now 8 weeks into the Campbell era. We've got a ton to go through. We're not going to entirely empty our notebooks because we can't record for 3 hours right now. We have a lot going on at lions247.com. I want to encourage
We'll see about that.
I want to encourage you to check out lions247.com because there's going to be a lot deeper rooted conversation over there to some of the stuff we're going to talk more at surface level here on the episode. But first things first, if you're not already subscribed VIP, we've got a great opportunity that has been ongoing now for a little while. It comes to a close, I believe, tonight, Thursday at midnight, as we record early afternoon Thursday. So if you're still hearing this on a Thursday, Mark, why don't you tell the people what they can take advantage of and why it matters? Because we're about to see this team get back onto the field next month. Things are starting to move now away from really strange transitional period to now wrapping our heads around what exactly these 2026 Nittany Lions will look like.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked a lot about everything that's gone down in the last couple months, and that was a lot of what Campbell recapped yesterday. Now it's how do they start putting this team together? How do they start building the chemistry? How do they start developing the players? So it was fun yesterday to actually get into that and start talking to some of the coaches about it. So, hey, $1, you get 2 months. We are so thankful for all the people who subscribed, and we hit all-time high after all-time high after all-time high, and we're cruising at an all-time high in subscriptions now. The vast majority of those are annual, but we know some people, they're not quite sure if they want to go annual. So give us 2 months. It's going to cost you $1. And if you do it by midnight tonight at Thursday as we record this, you're going to get 60 days, takes you into spring practice, and let us show you what we're able to do. So I'll leave it at that, and I think it speaks for itself. A lot of recruiting stuff coming up, too. They're turning the page to the 27 and 28 classes. We know how important that's going to be because they didn't have a gigantic class this year. Had a chance to talk to Derek Hoosier about some of that. We'll get into that a little bit later. So a lot cooking, a lot going on, and it's a good time to subscribe.
Yeah, General Manager Derek Hoosier also available, all the position coaches, the coordinators, really good opportunity for us. We're going to dive into that a lot right now. And because Mark referenced recruiting right there, and yes, with these 2 months, not only will you get behind-the-scenes scoop on what Penn State is doing on the practice field with all these new players and coaches, but you'll learn which recruits are showing up on campus to watch these practices, how they're responding to those opportunities, new offers, new targets, and all that stuff from Tyler Calvaru. So he will join us on the next episode of this podcast. I didn't want to bury the fact that Penn State did see a 5-star target in state in Kaman Spell commit to Georgia. That happened a few days ago. We'll address that and other recruiting news with Tyler Calvaru. So Penn State also launched its 2028 recruiting class with an in-state commitment a few days ago. When we have Tyler on, we'll dive into more recruiting. Some of it will be fun to discuss. Some of it will be not so fun in regarding Spell. And we'll also talk about freshman superlatives because he has a piece up at Lions 24/7 talking about this freshman class. But shifting focus back to what we experienced Wednesday in the Beaver Stadium media room. Daniel, as I said, this was a different version of Matt Campbell because we got the introductions out of the way earlier. We weren't talking about his time at Iowa State. It was about what's happening right now on this campus. He told us the last 2 months have, quote, been a whirlwind in a multitude of ways. He also said, quote, it's been a joy to watch this thing come together. What did you kind of take away, Daniel, from hearing Matt Campbell describe what they've tried to accomplish the last 8 weeks? He described it as an exhausting period of time. He described it as sleepless nights, as fast and furious. Thought he was pretty candid about the process.
Yeah, I think that while Penn State isn't on the practice field yet, things aren't happening in that capacity. This was pretty much talking about ball, if you're Matt Campbell, or as close as you can get at this time of year to talking about ball. I think the one thing that stood out to me is a comment he made about roster building through the transfer portal. I think he described the roster as having layers, or taking a layered approach to it. And I think that's something that we talked about a little bit when we were analyzing the players who were coming in. Penn State has built this thing for 2026. When you talk about fifth-year senior quarterback coming in, a ton of upperclassmen with a bunch of experience, mostly from Iowa State, like you look at a team that, okay, like you can see this team winning some games when you get into the fall. But at the same time, they brought in younger players from Iowa State. They brought in younger players from elsewhere in the transfer portal. I think that there's an element of sustainability with how they've been able to build this roster. And so not only will they have the pieces together for 2026, but as they're sitting in their meetings, they have a plan for 2027. It's not like we're going to get to December, the 2026 regular season is over, and they have to do this thing all over again through the transfer portal in terms of building a roster. So I think that was something that really stood out to me. In terms of nuts and bolts, I think big picture, more, esoteric, was getting probably a more standard Matt Campbell press conference experience. Like you said, Tyler, when we talked to him in December, that was emotional. That was a kind of a big event. That was something different. This felt a little bit more like maybe what it'll be on a weekly basis. So a lot of different detail from him. I think we got some good insight in different areas. Like you said, I thought he was pretty candid. I think all of our big takeaway, he's a big eye contact guy when he's up at the podium. He's not looking around speaking to the room. He's speaking to you, which is going to be something else to get used to. So, I thought overall it was really informative. There's so much to, really parse through and take out of it. But coming out of it, I think we see the vision a little bit more from Campbell.
Yeah, your eye contact commentary is on point. I think Matt and I spent about 3 minutes staring each other down as he discussed the running back room. I appreciate his approach. And Mark, I'll tell you what, if this is the standard Matt Campbell we're going to get, we'll take that 7 days out of the week in terms of our reporting coverage. And I'll say this, though. I am very hesitant to judge who a coach is and his interactions with the media and what that relationship is going to be like and how he's going to handle himself until he suffers an emotional loss. So we don't know the full picture yet, because those will come and big wins will come, and we'll learn more about Matt Campbell and through all that process. But Mark, before we dive into some of the details on players, on coaches, generally speaking, this guy is now the face of the program. For the last dozen years, James Franklin was the face of the program. How is that evolving in your mind after spending those 40 minutes or so with him in the Beaver Stadium media room?
Yeah, a couple things. Standing at the podium, that was new for us. And I know that may not seem like a big deal, but I mean, I've been covering this team forever, and I've never seen a coach do that before. And not that it's good, not that it's bad, but it's just something a little bit different. And I think maybe that's more of his comfort zone. But the amount of detail he went into, he had some notes there, but he wasn't really referencing those notes. And Tyler, you asked him about the running backs, and I mean, he went off, and I texted you during that, right? I mean, I'm like, oh my God, this is like unbelievable. He is like giving us so much input here. And then Mark Wogenrich from PSUSI, is that what his outfit's called now? Sorry, yeah. Wogie.
Yes.
He half jokingly said, could you give us the rest of the roster? And he essentially gave us a rundown of the rest of the roster. So
position by position by position. And we have a full breakdown over at Lions247.com. But you're not kidding. He did not miss a position. He was pulling names that came over from the transfer portal. He was pulling names of guys who were retained on this roster. And again, he wasn't looking down at a piece of paper. He wasn't reviewing a roster. He wasn't looking down at an orchestrated set of notes. That was impressive.
Yeah, and that's not being critical of anybody else. I was just like, wow. I mean, I could imagine what was occurring to me at the time is I'm having trouble putting names to faces. Like, we're up there with the new assistant coaches, and I'll admit it. I mean, I'm having to look at some name tags. I mean, it's not easy to do. And this dude is going through the running backs, and mentioning Dante Sheffy, the kid who just signed from State High. And, he's going into walk-ons. And I mean, it was like I'm like, wow, this is, he has a recollection there. And why is that important? Because when you're building a team, when you're trying to bring together essentially two teams and then add in, pieces from all these other places and all these new staffs, you need somebody to be kind of the focal point of it all. And clearly this dude is the focal point of everything. And I mean that in a positive way, in that I can't imagine how many ways he's been, whatever he said, however busy he said to have been, it had to be beyond that. I mean, it had to be absolutely beyond that. I mean, I got a note yesterday from somebody, and I shared this with you guys, saying that this week he's reaching out to Letterman on Zooms, organized decade by decade. And so beyond everything else that he's doing these things. He's showing up at hockey. He's showing up at wrestling. I mean, I just think, you talk about making a great second impression. I thought he made a great second impression, for the first impression, obviously, being when he was introduced.
And I think the good thing is he mentioned, everything feels stabilized for him with his family now in State College. That's a big step for a lot of these guys. I think Derek Hoosier told us that his wife and his children were making the move here to State College. So these guys are slowly but surely starting to settle in. In a moment, we'll tell you about someone who is not settling in on the coaching staff. But Daniel, I want to pivot and talk about Matt Campbell's first commentary on Rocco Beck with us. Now, obviously, he's discussed Rocco Beck a bunch as Iowa State's head coach. He's been QB1 for the Cyclones the last 3 seasons, a guy who has thrown for more than 60 touchdowns, has thrown for more than 9,000 passing yards. Matt Campbell told us he believes that no one in college football right now has more experience in leading touchdown scoring drives in the final moments of a game than Rocco Beck. And so what did you take away? Because this is a guy that we envisioned as soon as Campbell's name surfaced as the likely hire for Penn State. A lot of us were saying, all due respect to Ethan Grunkemeyer, who was preparing for the Pinstripe Bowl, it was hard to deny a destiny that would be seeing Rocco Beck follow him here to State College. And, of course, that did happen.
I think Campbell's commentary on Beck, like if you're a Penn State fan listening to it, I think you should be pretty excited for the type of player that you're going to get and what his approach is going to be out there on the field. He's one of those players where most of the commentary is about his intangibles, playing through injury. He had injuries to both shoulders last year, one of which required surgery. I think character, integrity, grit. I think those were the words that Campbell used to describe him. And just talking about his leadership, like he has the ability to connect, across the position rooms, across the roster to a bunch of guys with different backgrounds. And so he sounds like the type of guy that you want to have as the centerpiece, to your football team, a guy who can come in and, be, a connector, to have an impact in that locker room where got a bunch of Iowa State guys, got a bunch of Penn State guys, got a lot of guys from elsewhere who, are coming in pretty fresh. The quarterback, a lot of leadership responsibility falls to him just because of the nature of the position. And it sounds like Beck is someone that is going to be able to put that together, is going to be able to help set the culture that Matt Campbell wants there.
Campbell described Rocco Beck as, quote, as tough and as competitive as any football player I've ever been around. And I can tell you, I picked the brains of some other position coaches that we got a chance to speak with after Matt Campbell. And I just wanted to get a feel like, what are you picking up from Rocco? Some of these guys were around him at Iowa State. Some of these guys came in from other schools, so they're less familiar. And to a man, it was, the QB1 vibes are there. He's walking around the campus. He's walking around the facilities like he is that guy. And he is gathering position groups. He is helping guys learn the playbook because he's been in it with this Iowa State staff that came over to Penn State. And it sounds like he's really been someone who's been at the forefront of facilitating this team unity. A guy who's new to campus, and he's got to, share that leadership role with guys who've been here with the team prior to his arrival. But it doesn't seem like he's been hesitant. It seems like despite the issues that he's had, and he's in an injury recovery situation right now, he's really hit the ground running. And just get into that injury situation, we did get a bit of an update there from quarterback coach Jake Waters. You had a story up for us, Daniel, at Lions 24/7 on Wednesday. So why don't you bring that here to the podcast? What did we learn about Rocco Beck, his availability? And remember, his first photos from campus, I believe, featured him wearing a sling.
Yeah, so Beck's had surgery to replace a torn labrum in his left shoulder. It's his non-throwing shoulder. That was in December, so he's been going through the rehab process. Waters said that he's going to start running soon, and they expect him back at some point during spring practice. That he'll be able to get into different periods. He'll be able to throw. He'll be able to participate in 7-on-7 or different individual drills, routes on air. So it does seem like he'll at some point he'll be out there on the practice field. We didn't get a firm timeline, but over those 5 weeks, over those 15 practices, however they break it up, it seems like Beck will be out there for, I think a good portion to build that chemistry, get his feet wet, and then, go from there over the summer.
And Jake Waters, the quarterback's coach, did sound intrigued or maybe even excited about the possibility of getting more reps to other quarterbacks. I think he has a very firm understanding of who Rocco Beck is as his QB going back to Iowa State. They've got Alex Mansky, who's a redshirt freshman. He didn't have a full offseason last year. He wasn't involved in the spring practice last year because he was recovering from an injury he suffered in high school. So they've got him on the field. They bring in a Division III All-American, Connor Berry. We'll talk a little bit more about commentary from Jake Waters later at the quarterback position because it certainly goes beyond Rocco Beck. But a bit of, I'd say, positive news there about where Rocco Beck is trending toward his availability and what he can accomplish on the field this spring. Mark, we heard from Matt Campbell glowingly review a couple of retained members of this roster who have strong history as Nittany Lions players. Trace McSorley, the assistant quarterbacks coach, and then Dan Connor, who was the linebackers coach last year. Now he's more in an assistant role in that room. And we'll talk about the new linebackers coach because you spent some time with him, Mark. But this kind of ties into what you have discussed here on the podcast in the past. You just brought it up, how he's lining up these by-decade Letterman calls. Terry Smith brought that up to me yesterday. He said, I believe last night's agenda was all the Letterman from 2010 and since. So it was the younger Letterman, but they had the 1950s, 1960s represented earlier this week. And really interesting to hear that. Are you here? I mean, Mark, no one knows this community better than you, especially here on this particular podcast. Are you getting a sense that there's a legitimate groundswell about how Matt Campbell is handling business with the history of Penn State over the first couple months on campus?
Yeah, I mean, when he was introduced, I mean, he went above and beyond to mention, every great Penn State player ever, whoever kind of existed. I mean, I'm joking, but no, the feedback I get from Letterman, and you guys know I'm friends with a bunch of guys. It was different. Back in the day, it was different. It was easier to get to know people. There wasn't a portal. Guys were here for 6 years or however long, and you kind of got to know them. But what I'm getting is it's a level of reaching out and genuineness, and we want you to be part of the program. Do whatever. If you have recruiting tips, give us recruiting tips. It's like they're asking for. I had a text yesterday, and I could bring it up and just tell you a little bit of what was in there. Come around spring ball, help mentor guys. If you know recruits, send them our way. I mean, these are like the little things that I think some Letterman felt was missing a little bit. It's not to say that Letterman weren't welcome, but you had to kind of be proactive. And I think what he's doing is kind of reaching out, which makes a lot of sense. I mean, because I forget how Franklin handled it when he first got here. He may well have done the same types of things. I really don't remember. But I think the fact that he's reaching out to these guys, and when I talk to players, former players that I know, it's resonating with them. And I think that's a positive thing for Penn State and he's also not run away from the Paterno tradition. And again, I don't want to cause an argument here or a debate among people, but I know there are people on both sides of things, but to me, you can never deny what Joe Paterno did for this program. I mean, you just can't. I mean, without him, the program's not here, and he's not basically turned away from that. I'm not saying he's overwhelmingly embraced it, but I think he's given it the proper respect that former players would expect. And, it's not just former players, guys like Kirk Deal, Spider, he's gotten to know all of these guys who were big parts of the program. Tommy Venarino. And I'm throwing out names that old school Penn State people would know who were support staff members who are still around, but he's made an effort to get to know all of these people. So I think that's been a really good thing for him.
I'd imagine the tricky part for Campbell as he continues to try to build this within the community is going to be dealing with the guys who've maybe been around the program the last few years and then left and they're in the NFL now, guys who were Franklin's guys, you know, and they maybe really felt a certain type of way when Penn State fired Franklin, and maybe they haven't shaken those feelings yet. But I think Matt Campbell's the kind of guy who can bridge that gap as time goes on. And one other thing I want to get into,
Tyler, you know what I would say is that, I mean, it's also not just Campbell. I mean, these guys are going to come back because it's Penn State, right? We saw Abdul Carter there for hockey, and I mean, it's like nothing. And I'm sure he loves Franklin. And
Michael Parsons showed up at a Penn State hockey game on the road, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, and then I mean, it was Denai Dennis Sutton. I saw him interviewed at the Senior Bowl and saying, yeah, I'm always going to root for, I'll root for Virginia Tech unless they're playing Penn State. So I don't think this is divisive as maybe we thought it might be when it first happened. I think cooler heads will ultimately prevail. James Franklin ended up in a good spot for him. And I think the players will realize. I don't think Penn State is going to have players turn their back. They didn't have players turn their back during the season, right? I mean, guys stuck around. Denai played in a bowl game. I still can't believe
Terry's still here. Terry's still here, and we said for a while that was going to be a big deal in this part of the conversation. Yeah, and we'll get into more about Terry Smith later because it was our first time speaking with him since he relinquished that interim coach title and now back in the cornerbacks room. But Daniel, I wanted to finish with Matt Campbell. And by the way, you folks can catch this entire press conference over at Lions247.com. As usual, Mark Brennan has that video up on the site. But Daniel, we still don't have it on the calendar. I'm looking over at my calendar right now. I don't know when the spring game is. I don't know when I'm supposed to cover Penn State in Beaver Stadium next, but we're close, according to Matt Campbell. He says probably expect an announcement next week on some details for the blue-white game. He wasn't heavy on the details, but he did kind of give us a bit of framework on what he wants to see happen to close out spring ball.
Yeah, so we'll see what it looks like. He said that he and Pat Kraft were still, working through things, talking through things. I think Campbell, gave himself a little bit of an out in terms of format, what it might look like by, bringing up a lot of guys coming off of injury and how, health will likely dictate, what the blue-white game looks like. I know that we saw, 2022? We saw an unusual format because they didn't have enough offensive linemen. Just the way that things worked out there. So, we'll see. I think that Campbell did say that he understands how important, the blue-white game is, to the community. And he also said that he wants to get his players in the stadium with fans in the stands. And I think his quote was that, he doesn't want Rocco Beck's first time throwing a pass in Beaver Stadium to be the Marshall game on September 5th, that he wants them to be in there, see that building with fans in it. Obviously with the construction, it'll probably look different in September than it looks on April, whatever. But yeah, he wants to get the players in there, and, it seems like there will be an event, which, I think will be good for the fan base too. Got to get to know all these players, got to get to know the new numbers, maybe some new faces, and, keep building that by the time you get to September.
Plenty from Campbell, but we also got a lot to dive into here because, as I said, we relocated to the recruiting lounge upstairs, and we got a chance to sit down at tables with a bunch of the position coaches and coordinators who have joined Matt Campbell. I think beside special teams coordinator Justin Lustig and cornerbacks coach Terry Smith, everyone was new to us. And, except for SID Greg Kincaid, who was helping run the show, and we appreciate what he was able to do for us. But I'll tell you what, there was a sense of energy from these guys, Mark. And I've been saying this for a long time. A lot of these players on this roster right now who came over from Iowa State and maybe came from different schools via the transfer portal, they are on the biggest stage of their careers. They are being rewarded financially at the biggest level of their careers. And the same goes for many of these coaches. They are on a different level of the college football ladder here at Penn State, competing in the Big Ten with national championships in the focus here at State College. That hasn't been, and no one's been shy about that, including Pat Kraft, the athletic director. And a lot of these guys are getting salaries that blow whatever they experienced before away. They have entered a new phase of their careers. And I think you could kind of pick up on that, where there is a real sense of buzz, opportunity. And I'm not saying that wasn't there with Penn State, because there was excitement every year, but there was a lot more of guys who had spent time at this level, who had experiences at the highest level of college football, who had been paid the big money for some time. And I think it was palpable to me, Mark, in terms of kind of sensing that conversation to conversation to conversation.
Yeah, I think they were enjoying themselves, right? I mean, did you get that sense? I mean, I thought that by and large, I mean, you're talking about what, 14 different personalities, but I also think they weren't nearly as reserved. We've dealt with a lot of outgoing coaches, but they would always most of them would always be very measured in what they would say.
Wouldn't they always sometimes they come across as though there was someone staring over their shoulder, just double checking what they might be saying to
I
us?
don't know who that might be,
I don't
but
know either,
yes.
yeah.
No, I mean, so I would say that Jaywan Sider was the one guy who never really cared. He would just tell us whatever he thought.
We love Jaywan, yeah.
But everybody else was always kind of measured. And, we'll get into Jake Waters in a little bit, but I was asking him about Rocco Beck and coming back from injury. Oh yeah, we'll get into the details when we talk about about Jake, but it wasn't really holding back on any of the details, and not that I think I never really understood why they held back on stuff that happened like last year, or why they wouldn't give you an update on when a guy might be able to play in spring ball, and that's just one kind of instance. But I thought there was kind of Clanton being asked about, shotgunning a beer at the hockey game, talk about things I didn't have on my bingo card, going into January about, what we might see and what somebody might be talking about. But there was definitely a looseness. And I felt there was kind of a looseness at the Campbell press conference. And just the one thing I would say, James Franklin, I think he paid attention to every single detail, as we all know, right? Mm-hmm. We've written things and we heard directly about them when somebody wasn't maybe quite happy about it. And I get the sense that these guys aren't as concerned about that sort of thing, which for the time being, we'll see how long that lasts, but I think it's a good thing for us.
Again, really hesitant to judge them fully until we get through the first one, and then we'll see what it looks like. But Daniel, one of the coaches that we got to kind of cozy up to, spend a bunch of time chatting with, his first time as a Penn State coach, and it will be his last time as a Penn State coach, apparently. Noah Pali. A lot of excitement about him as the receivers coach. Spent time at Iowa State, has a track record at lower levels of college football of producing talent, developing talent. And it sounded like he was making a lot of good work on the recruiting trail, making an impact. He has former Iowa State starting receivers under his watch here at Penn State. And then Thursday morning, Matt Zenitz from within our 24/7 Sports and CBS network reports that he is taking another job. He is heading to the NFL, to your Green Bay Packers, as the wide receivers coach, a position once held by James Franklin. And all of a sudden, we're launching another coaching search. Daniel, tell me your takeaways from your time with Noah Pali, because it was the first and last time you'll get to do it. And ultimately, where you think Penn State goes from here in the position room, because so much of it was kind of tied to his familiarity with the pieces there.
Yeah, I think me, you, and Tyler Calvaruso, we all had pretty much the same reaction verbatim when I sent this to the group chat this morning.
WTF, something like that.
yeah, and it was I think it's a surprise in the fact of, like, we just talked to this guy yesterday, and now he's leaving pretty quick. And there's a lot of excitement about him. We've talked about the wide receivers so much at Penn State, what this could mean, etc. But the more that I've thought about it, the NFL operates on a different sort of schedule, than college football. And that's just how things work. A little bit different of magnitude, but we saw John Scott leave however many years ago that was. And that was, a little bit after the fact when he went to join the Detroit Lions for a little bit. Paulie is someone who has NFL ties. He to the Green Bay Packers specifically. He worked with them in 2022 as part of the Bill Walsh Diversity Fellowship that the NFL runs. And also he coached Christian Watson, the Packers wide receiver, at North Dakota State. So he does have connections to that program. I asked him a question about, being from Minnesota and, which we consider to be Big Ten country. And, was there any pull, to being at Penn State, to coaching in the Big Ten? And, he was kind of just like, not really. Like that, there's other stuff, he grew up watching other football, that sort of thing. Mark, I was going through and Mark asked him about, career aspirations, because Pali was interviewed by the San Francisco 49ers for their offensive coordinator job, I believe last year. And, he said that he's very much like, be where your feet are. We'll, when things come up, then we'll look at it, and then we'll keep going. And so, I don't think there was anything like, really like nefarious going on. I think that, the one thing that I put on our board, or I think someone on social media was asking me, and I said that, most places in football, you treat things as business as usual until they aren't. We know how fickle these contracts can be. We thought Kalani Sitake was going to be the Penn State coach, and then we saw how that changed. Like, these things happen quickly, they can fall apart quickly. And I think a lot of coaches, you just try to stay steady and keep moving. Like if we show up yesterday and it's suddenly like, Noah Pauly's not going to talk, like, we're going to put him on ice and you'll get everyone but him. Like, what kind of message does that send? What kind of panic does that send? How does that change things? So, I think that this is just one of those things where it's how the timing works out. I mean, maybe it would be different if we'd like talk to them on Monday and then this happens Thursday. It's probably a different reaction. And the last thing I'll say about things is that, this isn't the first time that Matt Campbell has had to deal with something like this. I went through his staffs, and Pali is the fifth assistant that he's had in the quick scan that I did, the fifth assistant leave for an NFL job, from Matt Campbell's staff. And this is going back to, guys that were on his staff in 2016. So it's 5 guys. It's happened 6 times. One guy did it twice. And so, this isn't like, I think, a unique thing of, being at this point in the cycle and having to replace guys, or, having guys leave for the NFL where, I don't necessarily think there's like an amount of money that you could offer someone to stop from taking an NFL job, or, something you can offer them that's, completely different that would stop them from taking that sort of job. I think that that's just how these things work a little bit. And so, we'll see what kind of Rolodex, Matt Campbell has and how things go. I think that having guys poached by the NFL off your staff on a pretty regular basis, I think that that can be a good selling point. If, someone wants to, coach in the NFL one day, hey, come to Penn State. NFL teams are watching what Matt Campbell's doing. We know that his best friend is an NFL head coach. We know there's so many other Mount Union guys that are scattered across the coaching world that he has connections to. So, hey, come to Penn State, stay here for a couple of years, however many long, and then NFL team might take a look at you. I think that this is going to be something new in terms of, the Campbell era, and like a new thing that you have to bake in every offseason, maybe every February when these things start to happen.
He will reunite with Christian Watson, who he worked with at North Dakota State, one of his pupils of note from his coaching career. So he'll work with him in Green Bay, and all of a sudden Matt Campbell back to the drawing board in the receiver room. And with that, we have some early buzz that we shared over at Lions247.com with our VIP subscribers. We'll continue to do that as we hear about who is being reached out to and who may be viable options to fill that receivers coach role with Pali moving on. And the interesting thing here is that when we heard from Matt Campbell on the receivers group as he was going position by position on Wednesday, 4 of the 5 names that he said aloud at receiver are Iowa State transplants. He talked about Chase Sowell and Brett Eskelsden, who came over as starters from Iowa State, but he also talked about Zay Robinson, Karan Brookins, who are younger, more developmental pieces at receiver. And then the other name he mentioned was Kobe Howard, who we know stirred a lot of buzz as a freshman, now going to be a sophomore. So sorting through that room, it'll be interesting. Keith Jones Jr. comes in from Grambling, a big body type. And I know Derek Hoosier feels like they found somebody special there, but they won't be working with Noah Pali moving forward. We'll keep tabs on that. They will be working with offensive coordinator Taylor Mauser, and that's where we're going to go to next. And I'll be honest, everybody that you spoke to as this staff was coming together kept telling us, Mauser's the man. Like, you want to talk to Mauser. He is going to give you a ton of great quotes. He is really loose. So you were the guy to approach him, Daniel, on our behalf as we were spreading around across the recruiting lounge, trying to get to many conversations as we could. So we'll go right back to you. What was your initial impression of Penn State's new offensive play caller. And I believe, we had just heard Matt Campbell call him one of the true ascending offensive minds in college football. He said that has been proven, and it's going to continue here at Penn State.
The one thing I'll say about Mauser is that he has a lot of good one-liners. I put some of those on the board when he was talking about the offensive linemen. He said Cooper Cousins eats nails for breakfast. He called Anthony Donko a big dancing circus bear in terms of his body type. He also had a saying that was, why he doesn't want you to get a bagel when you can get an omelet, which I had never heard before, but in the context it made a lot of sense. So it'll be fun to get to know him a little bit more. There are a couple of things that stood out, from talking with him. Going back to what Mark said earlier about trying to foster a connection with the alumni base and the Letterman. Mauser talked about in the tight end group chat that they have, he's trying to get numbers of ex-Penn State tight ends, and then he'll send them to the group chat so that the players have them. And he said that he wants to go back and get every cell phone number that he can for Penn State tight ends. Another thing that he said that I think was talked about in terms of scheme, but I think can be applied holistically with the staff, is that he called the staff very, very curious. And I think curious is a really good word to use because, when you talk about what Mark said in terms of the people that Matt Campbell is reaching out to, who he's getting to know, what he wants to know, I think that there's a real level of curiosity there and approaching things like you don't already know everything. And I think that the way Mauser talked about it, that's how they approach things in terms of scheme. On the field, where if they see something, they want to know how it works. They want to see if they can use it. So I thought those are a couple interesting things. He did talk about Rocco Beck a little bit, and he gave I think interesting insight into the relationship that he has with Beck, because when James Franklin was here, the offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach position these past couple of years, that was pretty much it was the same thing. Mike Yursich, well, I guess when Andy Kotelnicki here, it wasn't, but Mike Yursich, OC, QB's coach. And that, I think too, we kind of viewed the offensive coordinator and the quarterbacks coach as kind of a unit in terms of how they went about things. Mauser is the tight ends coach, so he's going to be working hands-on with a different group, while Jake Waters is, back with Beck and the quarterbacks. And Mauser said that because he's not, on top of Beck, 24/7 all the time, that he can be, the word he used was more loosey-goosey, with Beck, that, Jake Waters is the one, and Matt Campbell is the one that is, hey, don't turn the ball over. You're going to have to take care of the ball. Here's the technique that you need to do. Here's the way that you need to approach the situation. Here's what it needs to look like. And then Mauser can come in and say, hey, go out there, let it rip. And he said he wants him to play fearless, that he doesn't want him thinking about the mistakes that he can make, when he's on the field, that he wants him to let it rip. And so I thought that was really interesting insight into some of the dynamics that are at play. I think it helps that you're porting over most of the offensive staff from Iowa State. So Mauser and Waters and Campbell already have that rapport, already have that relationship. But that really stood out to me as pretty interesting, because I think a big thing that we talked about was the manner in which it seemed like Drew Aller was being coached over these past couple of years, and what the points of emphasis were, those sorts of things. And it seems like this staff approaches things maybe a little bit more differently.
We got to let it rip from Mauser. How many interviews do we have to get through before he says chuck it deep? Because that would chef's kiss, wouldn't it? A tight end, because remember, Mauser also serves as tight ends coach, and you brought that up and trying to connect past tight ends with current tight ends. I thought there was really interesting commentary from Matt Campbell on this position group, because he said, we have a Mackey Award semifinalist from last year, and Benjamin Bramer coming over from Iowa State. He's here now. He led Iowa State in catches and touchdown receptions last season. But he also made it a point to bring up Gabe Burkle as a future NFL tight end. Burkle is another senior eligible tight end who comes over from Iowa State. He suffered a significant injury, a knee injury last year against TCU, but he's a guy who caught around 30 passes each of the last two seasons. He's not 6'7", 255 pounds like Bramer, but he's 6'6", 250 pounds. So he is a big specimen. He believes that last year that if he had stayed healthy for a full season, that we'd be talking about Burkle in regards as one of the top tight ends in college football. And then he actually acknowledged Andrew Rappleyea as that guy. And I spoke with general manager Derek Hoosier about Rappleyea, and he said, yeah, that was one of our first priorities, was to lock this guy in as part of what we wanted to be as a culture at the tight end position, in the offense, in the locker room. And we know that Rappleyea was one of the first guys to announce he was sticking around for 2026. He finished the season fantastically, touchdown reception in each of the last 3 games of the season. And then Campbell also brought up Cooper Alexander, who's a younger tight end that they brought in over from Iowa State. He said he's one of the highest recruited tight ends in the country coming out of high school, and they feel like he adds more flexibility and ability to that group. So still a lot of excitement there. And Mark, we're going to get into it on the quarterbacks coach now. You mentioned it earlier, Jake Waters. He's a guy who's been working in tandem with the offensive coordinator, Taylor Mauser, with the head coach, Matt Campbell, with the quarterback, Rocco Beck. Now they're just wearing a different brand logo. They're doing it on a different campus. What did you pick up with your time from Jake Waters, who's another one of those younger assistant coaches on the staff who really has a chance to step into a spotlight and blow up his career in a very good way if he can make it work here at Penn State?
Yeah, first of all, I didn't realize how banged up Rocco Beck was last year. Besides his left shoulder, Waters said that his right shoulder was messed up. He had a concussion at one point, and there were often times that he was unable to practice until Thursday. So when you look at his production last year compared to the previous year, and obviously they lost a couple of really good receivers to the NFL, he was down about 1,000 yards, not quite as many touchdowns, but I think a lot of that had to do with the injuries. But the one, the quote that Waters had, ultimate competitor. No matter how the game is going, you always have a shot to win with Rocco, whether he's playing, whether he's playing well or struggling. Man, he came back and won us games in the second half, 2-minute drives, and talking about things that we haven't seen here. And with all due respect to Drew Aller, as good as he was, I'm anxious to see if this translates to the Big Ten, being able to do stuff kind of in the clutch like that. So that's what kind of stood out to me, talking about, going back to what Daniel said earlier, the importance of getting him reps at some point during the spring, just to be able to connect with all of these receivers. And I know there are receivers that he's thrown to before, but you mentioned Rapp, you mentioned Kobe Howard, and he thinks he can get even better. I mean, he thinks there's room for improvement once he is fully healthy. So that was the main thing that stood out. He's also very high on Mansky, the young quarterback who's coming over. I didn't realize how big the kid is. It's weird because 6'3", 225, and he talked about how athletic and how tough he is. So looking forward to that, seeing what he's all about. So those are a couple of things that really stood out to me. But he really he also talked about working with Trace McSorley. Mm-hmm. And Trace is a little bit behind him on the coaching path, but you can see they're kind of both the same kind of sorts of guys. Kind of modest isn't the right word, because anybody who saw Trace play, when he scored a touchdown, he'd do his bat swing. But when you talk to him in person, I guess is what I'm getting at, they kind of carry themselves the same way, with the kind of a certain level of confidence. So I think people are going to like Jake Waters the more they get to hear him. And I believe I put a video up. I'm confused on how much video I've gone through already. I think there's a video of him up talking about Rocco Beck.
Yeah, he's Jake Waters, 33 years old, played at Kansas State after starting his career at Iowa Western, got some time in the professional ranks of football as well before going back to Iowa Western as a volunteer coach back in 2015. He has worked his way up to this point. He had been on Iowa State staff since 2021, initially as a quality control coach, became the quarterbacks coach in 2024. So a couple years of experience with Rocco Beck. And I'll echo what you said. Definitely got QB of the future vibes when he was talking about the redshirt freshman Alex Mansky. I think there's a scenario where maybe they had been able to convince Ethan Grunkemeyer to stay, and maybe he's that guy. But I don't think he was interested in being sold on QB of the future. I think he was interested in continuing his career as a starter. He'll get the chance to do that at Virginia Tech. But what was interesting to me as well was he said they were aware as a staff that there was a bit of a gap in experience. They had Mansky, who got some run. I think he played 50 snaps maybe as a freshman last year while preserving his red shirt. But beyond him, you're working your way to the true freshmen who are here. Case Evans out of Texas, and then Peyton Falzone, an in-state prospect. And they, as a staff, wanted to address that. And Derek Hooger, the general manager, really credited Jake Waters for being diligent and kind of scouring every level of college football. Like, who could be this veteran guy, someone who's played a lot of football, but also somebody who would be okay coming to this campus knowing they weren't going to be in that QB1 competition. And they found a fit in Connor Barry, who was officially announced as signed on Wednesday. We had reported that he was committed to Penn State a few weeks ago, and he is a senior eligible player from Christopher Newport University in Virginia. It's a Division III program. He was a Division III All-American last year. We brought him up on the podcast before with Tyler Calvaruso, but I just want to reiterate the motivation that we heard from Waters was to create competition at the QB2 spot, to give yourself someone who has seen live bullets in game action, regardless of the level that it's happened at. And then I think that buys them some time. I know he's very intrigued by the athletic ability of Peyton Falzone, what he could grow there. They really like Case Evans, the guy they recruited to Iowa State initially, but a really stabilizing maybe pickup here, whether he's just practice field fodder, whether he's actually one play away from being the quarterback for Penn State. It sounds like Jake Waters very pleased they were able to pick up Connor Barry, bring him in as a transfer. Yeah, Mark, go ahead.
Radical change for Penn State, right? I mean, they steadfastly refused to bring in veteran quarterbacks. I mean, right? Am I to their own detriment at times that they would not bring in somebody who had played a lot of football. So this is definitely changing the guard. Christopher Newport, also want to throw out Division III lacrosse powerhouse that my nephew Max Wayne was an All-American lacrosse player there.
There you go. All-Americans. That's all they do at Christopher Newport.
Hey, I went to see a lacrosse game there. It was fantastic. It was awesome.
I wanted to get into the conversation I had with Savon Huggins, who I believe, well, for now, he was the last position coach added. We're going to need to see
nice.
But it felt like until this morning that Savon Huggins was the last man added to that position coach plan. Running backs coach, spent the last few seasons with Boston College, working with Bill O'Brien. He was retained by 3 different coaches there, which Matt Campbell referenced is a really a testament to him that all these coaches kept coming, taking over the program, trying to put their new identity at Boston College, and they all wanted him to be the running backs coach. He sees this opportunity. He's a guy that's familiar with this region from the state of New Jersey, was one of the premier prospects in the country in the class of 2011, I believe it was. Might have been 2012. He ended up signing with Rutgers, a huge victory for the Scarlet Knights at that point. Didn't materialize the way he or Rutgers would have liked. He finished his college career elsewhere at a lower level, but he has really become a rising star in the coaching ranks. And Matt Campbell referred to him as a Grand Slam hire when we brought his name up on Wednesday and talked about his really respect and understanding of this region as a recruiter, someone who's experienced what it's like to be in those cleats of a top-ranked running back recruit coming to campus, and then someone who has proven he can do it year after year after year with what he has to work with. And those resources will ramp up for him at Penn State. And I thought the biggest thing that I took away from hearing from Savon Huggins and Matt Campbell on the running backs room, and I'll throw this to you after I'm done, Daniel, they certainly were selling this as a 1-2 punch, at least right now with the 2 transfer pickups. Carson Hansen, 21 total touchdowns the last couple of years at Iowa State. He's been their bell cow. I think he went over 100 rushing yards in each of the final 5 games last year. They fed him the football a ton, and Matt Campbell said they don't trust anybody more than him essentially on this roster. They have a full trust in him. But he said, and so did Savon Huggins, that they got something special in James Peoples, who's going to be a junior, spent his first couple of years at Ohio State. Those two complement each other. They feel like they have both really got to work in a significant way together. And then both Savon Huggins and Matt Campbell brought up, well, what do you do with Quentin Martin? What's next for Quentin Martin? And we heard a little bit more on that subject from Matt Campbell. And to me, Daniel, this is going to be one of those storylines. Remember last year we talked about RB3 a lot, and we're like, who's it going to be? Who's it going to be? And it was no one. The answer was absolutely no one. It was just Nick Singleton, Katron Allen, and then a blank slate. Now there is a fascinating thing here where I don't know if we would label him RB3 behind a 1A, 1B situation, because both coaches, Campbell and Huggins, referenced that Quentin Martin has a unique physical ability and as a receiver to kind of do some things for you in particular packages. So this is one of those things. This kid's year 3. We heard about him forever as a recruit. They loved him as a recruit. We haven't seen it on the field much to this point. but he's a wild card for this entire roster. And the way he was referenced by both of these coaches yesterday, beyond Carson Hansen and beyond James Peoples, leads me to believe that they are leaving the door open for him to sprint through and stake claim to a significant share at running back. Huggins said he will take a long time to decide, how snaps get spread, what that distribution might look like, but he's not afraid to utilize a variety of guys. And I think coming off a 100-yard performance against Clemson in the Pinstripe Bowl, Quentin Martin is in a place on this roster where we're not projecting him as the starter, but it's hard to ignore that he has taken forward strides and felt like, to be honest, when the regular season ended last year, that his days may have been numbered as a Nittany Lion just based on external observations from our end.
Yeah, I think Quentin Martin is maybe one of the biggest beneficiaries of a clean slate with a new coaching staff coming in, just given the fact that we did not see him at all last year. And that, some of the feedback that we got from Stan Drayton about that, not Quentin Martin specifically, but that group collectively of the younger running backs was not exactly the most positive in terms of what they were bringing to the table. So I think that Martin is someone who has the chance to start over a little bit. The last time that everyone saw him, he made a good impression, and then you can go from there. I did think it was interesting hearing Campbell talk about Quentin Martin at the podium and what he said. When James Franklin was here, we talked about how, sometimes Franklin was pretty good at sending messages, and that, saying things that were directed at certain players or certain situations, maybe not necessarily explicitly or, but he would take the opportunity when he had the chance to challenge guys in certain situations. And I think Matt Campbell talking about Quentin Martin and saying, hey, we want you to be 220 pounds. We want you to be a physical runner. We want you to use that, 6'1" frame and, be physical, use it, put weight on it, and be able to bang in the middle. I thought that was really intriguing to me because we know what that skill set that he has is, like you said, as a receiver. And we saw him his freshman year, Penn State, maybe try to get a little gadgety with him, even though it was just in really, really fleeting looks. But so to hear, Matt Campbell say, like, hey, we want you to buy in to being like a power running back, to put on the weight. He said he was up to 209 pounds. I think he said he finished the year last year at 195. That's a lot of weight. And it's an interesting project for a strength staff that we're getting to know and figuring what they're all about in year one. But yeah, I thought the way that they talked about Quentin Martin, publicly was pretty interesting. And it felt like the one time where it was like, there's a little bit of a message being sent. I think that, Campbell was pretty, overall, like given the rundown, I thought he was, gave us a lot of insight, but it was just insight. I think this was the one time where I was like, oh, they're explicitly saying what they want someone to do, to us. And so yeah, I thought that it was pretty intriguing to come away from.
I'd agree with you. And it wasn't just about like the weight when he steps on the scale. It was his style of play. He's like, this guy with his frame needs to be a physical back. He needs to be able to do that. And I know Stan Drayton had said that was the next step for Quentin Martin, was showing what he could do between the tackles. I think we saw some nice things in the Bronx back in December, and we'll see what's next for the running back room. It's been a while since we had guys to really focus on that weren't Nick Singleton and Katron Allen. So kind of a reset there, just like there is in a lot of rooms. And when we talk about defensive coordinator D'Anton Lynn, another Letterman, another guy who has a history here on campus as a player, and somebody who spent time at USC, UCLA, the NFL, really carved his name as a rising figure in the coaching ranks. He makes the move as defensive coordinator here last month, and it was our first chance to hear on him from Matt Campbell, who really discussed zoning in on him as their priority, as we reported at Lions247.com several weeks ago, and ultimately getting that materialized and getting him to campus. And so there you are, Daniel, with D'Anton Lynn. You're the only guy from our staff who had a chance to really sit and spend some time with him. So I'm curious what you took away, because he is a guy that a lot of folks have been wondering what makes him tick. Why is he back here? Does he want to get back to the NFL? There's a lot of questions about Lynn, who's, again, mid-30s, and from what we understood, had a few options if he was going to leave USC that did not involve Penn State. So he was a commodity in the coaching carousel really every cycle lately.
I told him, I said, hey, D'Anton, we've seen some pictures of you, when you were a recruit on some visits here. And, could that kid have ever envisioned, being at this point, being back as a defensive coordinator? And he's like, no, he's like, I could not have seen things going this way. I think he had a comment where I think Greg Pickle from BWI asked him about his time with the Ravens. And he talked about how formative that was for him. And he said that when he was there, he never thought he would coach in college. And that it was, Chip Kelly called him out of the blue. I forget who exactly was the recommendation or the connection there. And then it was, off and running a little bit with his college career. The one question, and I got to go back through the audio and, nail down the quote specifically, but he was asked, why this year? Why now? Because his name got floated during the Jim Knowles hiring process as someone that Penn State could pursue and potentially take the job. And, he said that he felt with, where he was personally and where he was with his family and where he was with his career. And not to mention Matt Campbell and belief in him, that it felt like the right time, for him to come back. I think that it's interesting. He has an interesting dynamic to oversee, because when you look at the offensive side of the football, it's, Iowa State pretty much. Now, a little bit different because you're going to have to replace Noah Pali, but in terms of yesterday, it was basically the Iowa State, offensive staff plus Savon Huggins. Defensive staff, they have a lot of different pieces, a lot of different guys with different backgrounds, some different specializations in terms of having an edge rushers coach in addition to the defensive line coach, keeping Dan Connor around while hiring a new linebackers coach, having a safeties coach that coached in a pretty unique system, the 3-3-5 at Iowa State, and kind of melding all of that together. And Lynn said that that'll really start, this month. That the past couple weeks have been about building that roster. Now they're getting into it, and now they're going to put these pieces, get the X's and O's together.
One of those pieces that he does have familiarity with, because they worked together at UCLA, is Coach Malloy, and his first name Aikika, I believe. We'll hammer that one down. But Malloy is someone who was available yesterday, and as it turns out, he's going to be more focused on the interior defensive lineman that has come to light since they added Christian Smith, and we'll talk about him a bit. He's an edge rushers coach who had formerly been the D-line coach at Northwestern. We picked up some things from him. But Malloy has been a quick fan favorite, Mark, because of his presence on social media. He has these Aloha Friday moments where he'll post a picture. And what we heard from Matt Campbell is he's the kind of guy who kind of feeds energy into every situation, positive energy. Did you get that sense? And what did he have to say about the defensive tackle group? Because we heard from Matt Campbell that they really feel like they have overhauled their approach. And he said, look, the Big Ten, first and foremost, you got to handle your business against the run. That's going to require big bodies. We saw that in what they did in the transfer portal. Malloy went out and got some guys he was familiar with from UCLA, from different schools out west. And he's really assembled a defensive tackle group that looks significantly different than what we've been accustomed to under James Franklin.
Yeah, I'm going to shock you by going off script. I just wanted to add something on Danton Lynn. I had a chance to talk to him afterward. And as you know, I covered Danton way back in the day. And he's very kind of soft-spoken isn't the right word, but he's not like an outgoing, extremely talkative person. His college roommate was Matt McGloin. So that kind of explains things, because Matt McGloin talks a lot. I said, it's surprising that McGloin became a politician and, you ended up becoming a football coach. But, a behind the scenes story. And it was pretty cool, because I brought up to him back when he was recruited by Penn State. He was from Saline, Texas, I think at the time. He had moved all around. And the guy who recruited him, and the reason he was coming to Penn State, was Brian Norwood, the former assistant coach. From the time that he committed until he was supposed to sign, Norwood took a job with Art Briles at Baylor. And Penn State ended up playing in the Alamo Bowl that year. And Norwood was unable to coach, even though his kid was playing in the game. At the time, Danton was going back and forth. He didn't know if he still wanted to come to Penn State, and ultimately he did. This year, this is unbelievable. This year, USC plays TCU in the Alamo Bowl. Danton Lynn is has all these things going through his mind about what his future is going to hold. Who is an assistant coach at TCU? Brian Norwood. He said he spent a significant amount of time talking to Brian Norwood about his future and coaching and all those things. So I thought that was like not taped. That was just us BSing. And I don't think I'm violating any confidences there, because it's not like it's like some terrible thing, but I just thought, and I'm sorry, I didn't think about this before we did the podcast, but when Daniel was talking about him, I thought that was a pretty cool story, how in the football world, things have a way of coming kind of full cycle. Yeah. So I can segue for you though, Tyler, because that
was great. No, don't apologize. That was
I can segue though, because
there's one other like a little parallel too, where Lincoln Riley didn't let Lynn coach in the Alamo Bowl, and so
there you go.
These things rhyme.
Well, that was in a lead up to the album, but remember, because it was he was coaching, he was there, he was doing press conferences and stuff, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So that's kind of the crazy part of it. But now here's my other segue, is that a couple years ago, when Danton was at UCLA, he was working with Malloy, if I'm not incorrect about that. And one of the things that Malloy told me, and I'm not going to waste my time attempting to pronounce his first name, we'll get it down at some point, is that I asked him about how kind of quiet and that Danton can be, and how does he get his point across. He said he gets his point across by knowing what he's talking about, that he's a very intelligent guy, and when he gets up on that board, that he knows what's going on. But a couple of things from Malloy. Number one, getting to the size of the defensive tackles. I mean, clearly they went out and brought in some big kids, including Siali Tauapeke. I hope I'm getting
Taupaki.
Right. Thank you for helping me out. The 35-year-old defensive tackle from UCLA. But they brought in a bunch of these guys, and he said one of the really cool things is that they're actually able to teach the other defensive linemen, because this kid was from UCLA. He worked under him, and some of the other players are a little bit more familiar, that they are able to actually teach, because the coaches have limited hands-on stuff at this point. So some of these older veteran defensive linemen that they brought in are essentially coaching the younger guys to the new style that they're going to play. The other cool story from Malloy was that he was asked about UCLA upsetting Penn State, and it was strange. You have to go and listen to it. We load all these things into something that transcribes it for people who don't know, and then everybody could listen to it and see what everybody said. But he started talking about Penn State in the first person, but he was on UCLA. And so it's like, how did you guys pull that off? He goes, well, we were coming off of a very tough loss in a whiteout. So I'm not going to say it that way. But so he said Penn State was coming off of a very difficult loss in a whiteout to Oregon, and that UCLA had absolutely nothing to lose. And they had the onside kick early in the game. He said they had 4 trick plays on special teams. They had a new offensive coordinator that nobody knew what he was going to do, and that they were blitzing like crazy because they knew that was the one way that they could stop the Penn State passing game. And he talked about how difficult it is in college sports when you lose to kind of bounce back from something tough, and that they were able to take advantage of it. And then I'm paraphrasing here, but he said, and thank God it worked, because it ended up getting me a job. So I thought that was just so funny. So it ended up getting him a job at Penn State ultimately. So it was pretty funny to listen to him.
I have to clarify something though. Malloy was not a part of the Bruins staff against Penn State. He went out with the old regime. He was done as defensive coordinator in September.
Well, maybe what he was getting at, because I could read it to you, but maybe what he was getting at is that upset got him the job. So it was completely interesting the way he was talking about it and about how tough it was. But he was talking about Penn State as if he was already at Penn State when it happened.
And he was defensive coordinator last year at UCLA.
And then he got canned.
Replacing Lynn, and before that, he was Lynn's defensive line coach. And he's got 2 UCLA transplants on this defensive line now. You mentioned Taupaki. The other is Keanu Williams. in the defensive tackle position. So he's got familiar pieces. And like you said, it's helpful because like we heard from Rocco Beck teaching guys the offense because he knows the staff. You got a defensive lineman, a couple of them actually who are veterans and know the way he wants to operate. And then started to, get to know Christian Smith a little bit yesterday as well. I sat next to him and he's the new edge rushers coach. He's again a young guy. I think he recently turned 30. He was on some 30 under 30 list across the industry not too long ago. Was really impressive in what he did at Northwestern the last few seasons as their defensive line coach, and now gets a chance to focus on the edge rusher spot here at Penn State. And if you hadn't noticed, that is a spot that's in flux for this program. They lost 4 of their top 5 guys when you talk about defensive end snaps from the 2025 squad. Chaz Coleman gone, Jalen Harvey gone, and then the starters, Zariah Fisher and Denai Dennis Sutton, also no longer with the program. Yvonne Kamaju, a huge piece here. I believe Matt Campbell referred to him as an anchor, said they were extremely impressed by what he accomplished as a true freshman last year, competing in the Big Ten. But we know there's a lot of questions beyond it. And the biggest takeaway I had from Christian Smith, and the first thing I wrote at Lions247.com coming away from our conversations with all these coaches, is that there's a new, very recognizable name at the edge rusher spot, and that is LeVar Arrington II. He spent his freshman season at linebacker. He enrolled last January. You never saw him on defense last season, but he still burned redshirt status. He got in 7 games in special teams coverage. They talked about, and by they talked about, I mean Christian Smith talked about what they saw on film from his special teams opportunities. The guy was flying down the field. He was one of the faster linebackers on the 2025 roster. Right now, 6'3", 220 pounds. They have a goal of him getting to 225 by the time spring practice starts. But it sounds like that everyone's on the same page here, where he really relishes the opportunity to get after the quarterback. He has some double-digit sack totals during some of his high school seasons. We know his dad was pretty damn good at getting into the backfield. But right now, I think that's really interesting to monitor. I don't think you can say he's going to be a solution for you from game one, but if he can gain some comfort level at that spot over the next several months, get in a preseason camp and start to make some noise there, that can make you feel a little bit better, because right now it's pretty difficult when the only transfer portal pickup they have at the position is Alexander McPherson, who was a true freshman last year at Colorado, played a bit, but didn't play starters worth a volume of reps. And so you start to work your way through this position room, and he has high hopes for a lot of these players. I found it very interesting the way he discussed Max Granville. He said everyone in the building knows what the reputation was for Max Granville this time last year. They said they understand, and they can see from his freshman film why people felt like he was a very viable breakout candidate as a redshirt freshman in 2025. His injury happens. He said they're not going to be stupid with getting him involved over the course of spring ball. They're going to do it the right way. So I don't exactly know how much or if at all we'll see Max Granville, but his injury, I believe, occurred last May. And it was a reminder to me in hearing some of that commentary from Christian Smith that let's not forget Max Granville, because he could be extremely, extremely important. We thought he could push Zariah Fisher for a starting job last year in his second year on campus. And so some takeaways there is Max Granville remains lurking, biding his time, waiting for his opportunity to get back to full work. We'll see if that can happen this spring or if it has to wait until August. And then LeVar Arrington II, someone to monitor there. They sound high on Alexander McPherson, but Christian Smith going to have his hands full, I think, and really establishing a quality 2 deep of guys he can count on. But I know Matt Campbell's very high on what he does with that room and what he can do with that work. And shifting over to you, Daniel, the safety room, kind of in a similar situation where so many of the names that were on the field a bunch last year are no longer here in State College. Deion Broomfield takes over the position room. And like many of the other coaches who came over from Iowa State, he brings over guys that he has a lot of familiarity with, guys that have started games for him at the power conference level. And just to let people know, I know we're over an hour and some people are like, man, this is a long episode. It's the only episode you're getting this week, folks. So savor it. And we're giving you a lot this time, but we're not coming back for another one. We didn't bring you one earlier. So this is a one and done for the week episode. So that's why we're going a little bit longer with so much to discuss. But Daniel, take us over to safety and break that down for us, because King Mac's gone, Dejon Lane's gone, Antoine Belgrave-Shorter's gone, and Zakee Wheatley's getting ready for the NFL.
Yeah, I asked Broomfield what it was. I didn't specifically say like, hey, what was it like when Dejon Lane said he was coming back and then decided to leave? I was more like, hey, you had a lot of uncertainty in terms of who was actually going to be here, and bringing guys in, and the turnover that they had, that was pretty unique. And he said that you just kind of approached it day to day, and that you tried to keep the bigger picture in mind of the roster that you were building. But, he did too, like similar to Matt Campbell. He acknowledged that, it was a whirlwind. It was a really busy time. And it was a little chaotic. Another thing that, goes back to Noah Pali with Broomfield is that I asked both of them, what it's like to recruit, as Penn State, for Penn State now. And Pauly's anecdote was that one of the schools he went to, he said it was the principal, the assistant principal, the head coach, and the superintendent were all waiting for him when he got there. And that never happened, before in his career, where he had a welcoming party. Broomfield said that, he's from Florida. And when he was recruiting for Iowa State down in Florida, he would have to explain, where it was, what it was. And he said that, in Florida, you see kids wearing Penn State gear, kids are in Penn State sweatshirts already, like that there is a brand and name recognition there that help in terms of the recruiting. As with the safety room, I think that it's really intriguing because it's one of the rooms I think that has, outside of quarterback, that, I think has really turned over the most in terms of the new names, new faces there. I mean, Fabu Torre is the only scholarship returner for that group. Matt Campbell had really good things to say about Marcus Neal, said that he was one of the, better defenders in the Big 10. Big 12. I think he might have said that you could call him the best defender in the Big 12 last year.
Yeah, he said that the best. Yeah.
Yeah. And Broomfield, backed that up, so that he's someone that is, very versatile. You can do some different things with, and as a playmaker back there for you. Jeremiah Cooper came up. He's working with the safeties, despite playing some cornerback, during his career at Iowa State. He's coming off of an injury, but Broomfield said that he's someone that you can put at every position, in the backfield, that you can do a lot of different things with him. The one, I think some scheme stuff came up, and I'm not the most scheme literate as some people, but at Iowa State they ran that 3-3-5 defense with 3 safeties, 2 cornerbacks, and with Lynn it's going to be more of a 4-2-5. I think with more of a traditional nickel or more traditional slot corner on the field and 2 safeties. And Broomfield said that it's not going to be too much of a departure from what they did at Iowa State, that the field safety in that scheme was pretty similar to a nickel cornerback, and that you'll look for the same traits in that spot that they were looking for before. There's going to be, I think, some other differences, but I thought that was, for me, that's something I could understand in terms of the scheme and how things are going to change from what he was doing at Iowa State and now coming over to Penn State. So it was, I think that safety room, Jamison Patton is in there. Amarian Davis came over from Boston College. They brought a lot of freshmen in there who are, big guys with some interesting athletic traits. I think it could come together in a pretty unique fashion there.
The way that Matt Campbell described that safety spot was really Marcus Neal, Jamison Patton, and then let's see who steps up behind those 2. So that's where we are right now with the safety position, is 2 Iowa State guys kind of at the top of that conversation. Let's roll over to linebacker with you, Mark. As we said, Dan Connor, Letterman, still here on campus, but taking a bit of a step back. He was the primary linebackers coach last year. He was essentially the linebackers coach when Tom Allen was here a couple of years ago. Now he's going to be working and kind of supplementing what Tyson Veit is looking to accomplish. And Veit was the defensive coordinator, another assistant coach on this roster, or who was a defensive coordinator last year. He did it at Cincinnati. Now taking over the linebacker room. You spent some time with him. Matt Campbell talked about Tony Rojas being a huge keep for them, and he loves what they were able to bring from Iowa State with Cooper Ebel and Caleb Bacon. He says they were 2 of the better linebackers in the Big 12 last year, and certainly sounds like those are going to be your top 3 linebackers with room for others to grow. And, man, he also mentioned Alex Tash, did Matt Campbell, said he has a chance to be one of the all-time great linebackers here. We're talking about a guy who has not started a college game yet, a guy who played, 6 games at the college level, didn't play in the Pinstripe Bowl. So keep your eyes on Alex Tash, clearly. Mark, what did you learn? Any kind of follow-ups on any of those guys from your time with Veit? Because we heard a lot from Campbell on some of these newer pieces and some of these emerging pieces.
Yeah, one thing I forgot just about Veit. He was at Iowa State before he went to Cincinnati, and he actually recruited Bacon and Ebel, and he actually coached those guys too. So I think that's a positive for Penn State in that he knows what kind of talent that he's dealing with. With Rojas, he's very high on Rojas. He was more reserved, and like, when might you get him back? And it's, he was not really getting into details. But what he did say is that Rojas, he can whatever he's going to do in the spring, and it wasn't clear what he's going to do, it still could be a really good learning process for him in terms of absorbing the defense, knowing what they do with their linebackers, that sort of thing. Said he still has a lot of room to grow, as good as he's been, that they think he can get much, much better. So those were a couple of the things. Tatch, I was trying to get him to maybe bite a little bit, because I had said Campbell was really raving, and he wasn't going there. So he was a bit more reserved in that respect. I did ask him about what sort of appreciation he had for the linebacker U tradition, and he's like, oh yeah, I mean, he immediately knew. And he said growing up in Ohio, they watched the '86 national championship game at his grandma's house, and he was trying to explain to me what old big TVs look like. And I mean, I had this guy probably like 10 years. It's like
furniture.
Yeah, it was like a giant piece of furniture, he said. And there was one chair, and you had to fight your way to sit in. And I didn't quiz him on the names of the linebackers in that game, but obviously Shane Conlon was magnificent, and then Pete Giftopoulos had the gigantic interception. But he talked about, remembering that game, and then the interception that clinched it, and how much that kind of, everybody kind of went crazy. So he has a really good, a great appreciation for what linebacker U is about. I think he's had a chance to meet LeVar Sr. This was before I realized that LeVar Jr. was moving to defensive end. But he said he's really looking forward to getting to know a lot of these former Penn State linebackers that he's followed kind of throughout his career. So really had an appreciation for that, which I thought was pretty cool. And I think the piece about him being very familiar, I think he was involved in the recruitment of Brazina a little bit, but he never had an opportunity to coach him. But the awareness that he has of all these linebackers who are coming over from Iowa State, I think is a good thing for Penn State.
Yeah, Brazina, another linebacker who approached 30 tackles last year for Iowa State. Ebel was tied for the team lead in total tackles. And then you had Caleb Bacon, who was a little more impactful as a guy getting into the backfield, almost 10 tackles for loss. And they all now wearing Penn State uniforms. And another position to get to here, we're just about done with our process. But Ryan Clanton, the offensive line coach for Penn State, I know a lot of people have kind of gravitated toward what you've seen from him on social media, some of his early posts from campus, him chugging a beer and then crushing the can on his head after or during a hockey game last weekend. Got a chance to break it down a little bit for where this offensive line room is heading, who are the key components, and hearing from him and from Matt Campbell previously, they feel like they hit a home run with their roster retention and keeping Cooper Cousins and Anthony Donko. And that's not really a surprise. We circled both those guys as priority needs to keep on campus in that position room. But what we've heard on Anthony Donko is that he is really living up to that reputation as a leader in the making. And he's really kind of growing into that, blossoming into that with the new regime, that he can be one of the most important figures within this locker room. And they believe he can be one of the more impressive offensive linemen in the Big Ten. And I followed up with Ryan Clanton. Where's he going to play? Guard, tackle? Phil Troutwine told us that it felt like an interior role represented his highest ceiling. We saw Donko first break into the lineup at right tackle in the Peach Bowl. Then he was at guard for much of his career. Then he was at guard last year, starting the season, finished it at right tackle in the Pinstripe Bowl. And Clanton says he will remain at tackle. He says that's where they see him as a fit. He mentioned some of the length. So he's going to be at tackle. You're going to see Cooper Cousins be a guy who can contribute in all five spots, according to Clanton. But I think we're really focused in on guard with him. Just like we heard from the former coaching staff, Ryan Clanton said Cooper Cousins is the guy who turns the lights on in the facilities, and then he turns the lights out at the facilities at the start of the day, at the end of the day. He's always there. But it was really interesting to hear him react to Trevor Burr, a guy who was on Iowa State's roster, started at guard. They really felt like he was emerging as one of the better interior offensive linemen nationally. And now he is here at Penn State. I think there's a good chance you see him at one of those starting guard spots, perhaps opposite of Cooper Cousins. And then center sounds like it's going to be a damn good competition. They love Brock Riker. They noted, Clanton noted that he was playing at about 275 last season, earning freshman All-American honors at Texas State. And now he's here. I believe Clinton said, he's over 280, 285. They're working him the right way, trying to build his frame. They feel really good about him, but they also really feel good about Dominic Rulli, fifth-year senior, started the Pinstripe Bowl. Sounds like both those guys are going to be able to have an opportunity to win the job. And I just think the other tackle spot, whoever's starting at tackle beyond Anthony Donko, we probably would have penciled in Egan Boyer at this stage of the year if he had remained on campus. He's probably going to be a starting tackle for Phil Trautwein in Florida. And the three names that Clinton brought up at tackle, aside from Anthony Donko, are Garrett Sexton, who's a redshirt sophomore. He brought up Malachi Goodman, who's 1 year removed from coming here as a five-star freshman. And then the other name he referenced was Owen Alcine, who was now a redshirt freshman. And so that's going to be a fun competition to follow. And again, Boyer got to start the Pinstripe Bowl, but we did see some of Garrett Sexton out there. And Malachi Goodman is someone that Matt Campbell brought up unprompted, that Ryan Clinton spoke very highly of. They said you would not think that this was some kind of hotshot recruit. There's nothing about that in his demeanor. It seems like he was fully understanding maybe why he wasn't on the field a bunch as a freshman, didn't have that experience, but they think he has a bright future and there's a lot to build with him. I think Ryan Clinton described his body mass index in terms of fat versus muscle as basically an elite level, like one of the best they've seen. And that matches with what we saw. Remember, Grace Brennan took a photo of Malachi Goodman going high to catch a pass at a prospect camp where he was just an observer. And we were like, this guy's a little bit different as a 6'5", 320-pound freshman. And so Malachi Goodman, to me, really re-enters the conversation now as a guy who may be able to push for a legitimate role at tackle. So a bit of a rundown there at offensive line. We have a lot more in-depth on all these positions coming your way at Lions247.com in the days and weeks ahead, putting things together. But let's finish up.
I have one Goodman note.
Go ahead on Malachi.
Mauser mentioned him unprompted too, and said kind of a quiet part loud of this move to Penn State for them, where he said that we didn't get guys like this at Iowa State. He said it was nobody's fault, but they just didn't get guys like that. So I think that there's a lot of excitement about him, and I think that you gain a little insight into how the staff is looking at the resources, the brand, what being at Penn State means for them.
Let's finish with Terry Smith. He's the guy who was in the spotlight to close out last season during that win streak to get them from 3-6 to 7-6. I talked to Terry yesterday. I was like, we weren't sure that you'd be here on campus. We weren't sure if you'd be the head coach. How's it feel? And he said he's sleeping a lot better to start. He said it was a lot of sleepless nights and tough sleep during November and into December when he was trying to sort through his future and Penn State's progress. And Mark, you've known Terry so long. I know you got a chance to chat with him too. Really seemed to be back at ease. I know he's excited to really sink his teeth back into the cornerback room. He described it as kind of being strange to walk away from that group. We'll talk about that group in a moment because it is maybe the strongest on this roster. But generally, what would you like to share from your time with Terry?
Yeah, I got there a little late, so I didn't get to dive into personnel, and I know that that we have some guys that we're going to talk about. But I was joking with him that, man, no police escort. You don't have 400 people around you, and he went, "I'm in mourning," and he was joking. But I mean, the funny thing is, I asked him about it, and I said, I thought maybe you might actually prefer it. He goes, yeah, I'm me, I'm a kind of a low key, quiet kind of guy. And a couple of minutes later, John Sauber from the CDT came over and said, Terry, I mean, this was like literally 2 minutes later. Yeah, I'm trying to look at the way that he answered. I'm just going to paraphrase it. But he basically said, Terry, what's it like not being in the big seat? You probably already answered this. And we're like, yeah, he just literally just answered it 2 seconds ago. But it was the thing that you're talking about. He said, I can get back to just coaching my 12 guys in my room, which I didn't I mean, that's a lot of guys in a cornerback room, but he said watching Campbell, being there from first thing in the morning until whatever. I mean, I just think it gave more insight into how much work Campbell is actually doing, that he doesn't miss this. Now, would he have loved to be the head coach? Yeah. But I have so much respect for this guy for taking this role, and everybody there. Mauser said it, and I forget what the exact word was, but he's like a superstar or something. I have a video that I'm going to put up about it.
When I was there, he called him special.
Yeah.
He said special.
Yeah. So a different or whatever it is. And, Mauser's calling him Coach Terry, like almost like Mauser is a player. You know what I'm saying? Like that level of respect. That's what all the players call him, is Coach Terry. And I mean that in a good way. I mean, I'm like thinking like these guys all have the ultimate respect for this dude and for what he did for Penn State and taking him through. Mauser was talking about what he did, what Terry and the rest of the staff did. And they credited the previous people who stuck around too in getting that roster through the bowl game. They have so much respect for that. So, but yeah, you can see Terry, he's like just a little bit more back to not having to be the head coach and being able to joke around with us even more like he usually would. And I'm glad he's still here. You guys know I'm a big Terry Smith fan, always will be. I know you're supposed to be unbiased, but you could root for people in life, and he's a guy I'll always root for. And it was good to see him in a very good place yesterday.
He's back in that room like he never left, but There will always be those moments he can look back on, hearing his name chanted in Beaver Stadium after a win over Nebraska and all the support that followed him. And, oh, by the way, he was rewarded for that experience. He is one of the top paid non-coordinators now in college football to remain on this staff as cornerbacks coach and associate head coach. I just wanted to note some personnel stuff that I picked up from talking with Terry about that cornerback room. Remember, all three cornerbacks who started in the Pinstripe Bowl, Darius Dixon, Aldavian Collins, Zion Tracy, stuck with the program. Tracy and Collins are seniors. Dixon is a sophomore. Prior to that game, you saw a starter, A.J. Harris, at the portal. He landed with Indiana. Terry Smith says the next step is to really see Aldavian Collins take ownership of the room. He said it's kind of a two-part thing with a couple seniors there with Zion Tracy, but he senses that Aldavian Collins could be a kind of in-command leader of the cornerback room. And I said, what? And he actually mentioned it's been a little while since we've had that kind of presence in my position group. I said, how long? Who's the last guy? And, when you ask a question like that, you don't necessarily know if you're going to get an answer. He thought about it for a second, and then he brought up Tariq Castro-Fields. And fellas, I believe that's going back to 2021 when they last had Tariq Castro-Fields at cornerback. And so to me, Terry Smith sounds like he is hoping Aldavian Collins can be that kind of a presence as a fifth-year senior, a guy who's had a lot of linear growth since showing up as a Mississippi State transfer in 2023. And then he really sounded excited about Jamir Joseph, which if you listen to this podcast, you should be well aware that we are too. He did not burn his red shirt as a freshman. You saw him return an interception for a touchdown against Villanova early on in his freshman year, but he played a lot in the Pinstripe Bowl. He's a dude that would have burned red shirt in a lot of cornerback rooms across college football here in the Big Ten and otherwise. And so I think when you're talking about who is that next man up beyond those three that we think are going to have a really strong chance of starting, Joseph is where I might turn my attention to. Terry Smith said he could be a factor on the perimeter. He could be someone who steps up in that nickel kind of role, which is where we expect to still see Zion Tracy. And then Ivan McDaniels is a guy that Terry Smith just talked about, that length that he brings from Syracuse. And that was really the wingspan. And there's a lot that you like about him coming in from the ACC. Could be a nice supplemental piece at cornerback too. So just a bit there. Matt Campbell said it himself, this cornerback room, you'll love it. You love what you see there. And I think it's very clear that they all feel like they have a star in the making in Darius Dixon. So that's it. We got to every position group. And we gave you what we could here on the podcast. We approached an hour and a half here. Do either of you have anything else to add? Because next week, our next episode, pretty sure we're going to pick it up with Tyler Calvaruso, talk about some things on the recruiting trail, talk about this freshman class as they get settled in. So may not hear from you for a bit. And Mark, I know we haven't heard from you on this podcast generally in a little while. So anything else to add after an hour and a half marathon session?
Just great to put names to faces. I mean, we have a photo gallery up. One guy in the photo gallery isn't as relevant as maybe he was 15 hours ago or whatever, 4 o'clock in the morning, whenever I ended up posting it. But when you go through these kind of things and all these new coaches come in, it's very difficult to get up to speed, and to be able to sit down and talk to people, I thought was just invaluable. And we have so much. I'm just telling people, we have so much stuff to go through, and we're going to be generating so much content out of this. And we'll get names right. We'll get when guys were actually coaching at UCLA and when they weren't right. It's a work in progress, but I thought it was a great thing that Penn State did. I'm glad they did it. And I think we're all the better for it. And, we still have our roundtable thing that we're kind of working through. I'm trying to put those out when there's not a ton of other content. That's allowing us to get a better feel for who the players are. It's allowing fans to get a better feel for who the players are. So these whole next couple months, man, this is what we're doing. We're going to be introducing you to coaches, to players, to support people. We didn't even get into Derek Hooger today, and I'm sure we're going to. So there's a lot more stuff that we have to unpack. Even after an hour and a half of a podcast, we're just getting started.
It feels like a mix of cram studying with all the players and staff, and then it felt like speed dating in a way on Wednesday, where you're spending 10 minutes at a table with a guy and shaking his hand, introducing yourself, and then asking about his life and what's next. And then you go to the next table and it's the next guy. And so hopefully
then I'm at a table and I look over like, oh no, Tyler's here. I got to go. No, there's Daniel. No, wait, where am I supposed to go? I'm confused. What am I doing?
We do expect, by the way, a sign of a similar setup with players this month, from what I understand. We don't know those details yet, but that should be, again, another chance to turn this 2026 Penn State team from an idea that we've been discussing and kind of just this thing that's materializing into what's really here on campus, what's really developing, the players who are stepping up, the coaches who are working with them. Daniel, final word to you.
Yeah, I mean, I echo everything Mark said. I mean, it's good to get some names with faces and get closer to talking actual ball instead of just paperwork, which was what a lot of the past couple of weeks were. So I think it was it's a different staff. It's definitely a new era at Penn State. It's going to be really exciting. One piece of news from earlier this week, if somehow you don't know, Penn State at Northwestern moved to a Friday night in Evanston to open the new Ryan Field. So if somehow you haven't heard that yet and you get it 90 minutes into this podcast, can adjust your calendar. But now, I mean, it does feel a little bit more, we have the schedule now. The coaching staff was done for a little while, and we're starting to meet people, starting to, I think, get a structure of this. So it's starting to get more real, and I guess all you can ask for in the first week of February.
And in case you missed our last episode of this podcast, we did break down that 2026 schedule in detail. Daniel joined me. We spent a lot of time going through some of the storylines from that schedule. And so check that out if you missed it. For now, stepping aside, again, this is the only episode we're bringing you this week. It was a jam-packed one. We hope you appreciated it. And this was, I know it's going to sound crazy, but this was really just scratching the surface. We have so much going over to Lions247.com, hours of interviews for us to transcribe, work through, bring to the board. We continue to do that. But remember, until midnight tonight on Thursday, $1 for 2 months of VIP access. Hop on board, take a look at our coverage and what we're doing behind the scenes over there. For now, stepping aside, I'm Tyler Donahue on behalf of Mark Brennan and Daniel Gallen. We thank you all for listening or watching the Lions 24/7 podcast.